The goals of transitional justice include helping societies move forward post-conflict, post-atrocity, post-totalitarianism. The Global Initiative for Justice, Truth, and Reconciliation takes a new approach to transitional justice, an approach that begins with the needs of victims, that begins with survivors and civil society, and ultimately works with governments as well, but we prioritize the needs of victims in creating our programs. Sites of Conscience are perfectly positioned to provide a platform for victims, survivors, families of the missing, marginalized groups, women, youth, victims whose narratives perhaps don't match with the official narrative in countries emerging from transition. They're perfectly positioned for these groups because they allow them to tell their stories. They allow them to listen to other stories and to have acknowledgement that these events occurred. Memorialization is an absolutely critical part of transitional justice. What we have found is that when victims, survivors, when marginalized members of the community are provided the space to talk about their experiences, there is a transformation that takes place. We've found that through Sites of Conscience programs, when victims and survivors are able to talk about their experiences, they can begin to bridge differences. And it's only through this bridging of difference that they can begin to work toward a just and lasting peace. What we found is that through Sites of Conscience programs, through the GIJTR, individual narratives can flow into shared experiences and ignite collective action. And it's this collective action that is the hallmark of GIJTR and Sites of Conscience. Very often, transitional justice processes embrace one official narrative of a conflict. And what we all know, what we've seen, what we've experienced is there are many different versions of what happens during conflict. Each individual victim, each individual survivor will have a different experience to share. Very often, victims, marginalized groups such as women, youth, are not included, their narratives are not included in the official government history of a particular conflict. And they won't feel engaged in the process of rebuilding and moving forward. It's the GIJTR's imperative to engage these voices, to provide an opportunity for alternate narratives to be a part of what will ultimately become the official narrative of a particular conflict. GIJTR is carrying out work in over 15 countries. Several examples include our current work in Sri Lanka, where we are engaging families of the missing in sharing their experiences and documenting the missing, and working on forensics, in creating databases, in collecting oral histories from members of communities whose stories have not to date been shared. This is an important part of the role of GIJTR, and it's an important component of the work of the Coalition of Sites of Conscience, because Sites of Conscience are trusted spaces for victims and others to share their stories. And families of the missing in Sri Lanka, for example, who have not yet felt comfortable that their needs have been addressed, that their voices have been heard, come to Sites of Conscience programs and over time build the trust they need to in fact begin to share their stories. To date, what we've seen is when victims are not effectively included in the process from the very beginning of that process, there is less of a chance that lasting peace will in fact be achieved. That is what we are working toward with GIJTR. We begin by working with victims, by working with survivors, and having them identify how they would like to move forward. This inclusive approach we've seen by past TJ processes. This inclusive approach is absolutely essential.